What happens when we can read minds, or take a pill and be smarter than Einstein? These questions may seem like science fiction, but the point of good science fiction is that it eventually becomes science fact. The mind is no longer the black box it used to be. We now have technologies and drugs that influence our minds. Because of these developments, existing human rights fall short. To stave off an even more dystopic future, we need a new, more fundamental right. That right is called cognitive liberty, and I am going to tell you all about it. Hi there, my name is Michiel and this is We Can Do Better. Each week we will discuss a subject relevant to our lives and see what we can do to make the world a little better. I will publish a new episode each Monday, so be sure to check it out. Now, let's get into it, shall we? Human rights are important. They protect us from the worst abuses by our governments. For example, Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights protects freedom of thought, conscience and religion. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution protects freedom of speech and freedom of religion, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has Article 18, which also protects freedom of thought, conscience and religion, Article 19, which protects freedom of opinion and expression, and Article 22, which protects the free development of personality. However, since these rights have been established, our knowledge and abilities have grown. Drugs and technologies that enhance or modify some aspects of cognitive functioning are no longer squarely in the realm of science fiction. Doctors prescribe stimulants such as Ritalin and Adderall to people with attention deficit disorders, and depressants such as benzodiazepines to people with anxiety disorders. EEG can now be used to replace passwords. An fMRI measures glucose metabolization, which is correlated with neuronal activity. The existence and use of these drugs and technologies is direct evidence that the brain, and therefore the mind, is no longer untouchable by our current abilities. Cognitive enhancement of otherwise non-impaired individuals is not only becoming feasible, it is the logical next step. Students are already using stimulants to aid in concentration while studying. And nootropics are classes of drugs and supplements which purport to enhance cognitive functioning, and while the efficacy is not certain, they provide a lot of promise for future development. However, we now run the risk of forced or non-consensual use. On the positive side, in the case of Cell v. United States, the Supreme Court placed strict limits on the forcible administration of antipsychotics for the purposes of making the defendant competent to stand trial. In contrast, in the United Kingdom, in the case of R.V. Hardison, the defendant was charged with illegal production of DMT and LSD, both illicit psychoactive substances. The defendant referred to Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights, freedom of thought, as including the right to experience altered states of consciousness by consuming these drugs. However, the judge dismissed this line of reasoning. This shows that existing human rights are insufficient. So, what is cognitive liberty? The term was introduced by neuroethicist Dr. Roy Sentencia and legal theorist Richard Glenn Boyer. Together they founded the non-profit Center for Cognitive Liberty and Ethics. The CCLE defines cognitive liberty as
the right of each individual to think independently and autonomously, to use the full power of their mind and to engage in multiple modes of thought.
The concept has two fundamental principles.
1. As long as their behaviour does not endanger others, individuals should not be compelled against their will to use technologies that directly interact with the brain, or be forced to take certain psychoactive substances. 2. As long as they do not subsequently engage in behaviour that harms others, individuals should not be prohibited from or criminalised for using new mind-altering substances and technologies.
As we can see, cognitive liberty provides both a negative obligation to refrain from non-consensually interfering with a person's cognitive processes and a positive obligation to allow persons to self-determine their own inner realm and control their own mental functions. The concept is based on three pillars. The first is privacy. What goes on in your mind should remain private unless you choose to share it. The second is autonomy. Self-determination over one's own thought processes is central to free will, autonomy and dignity. Decisions concerning whether or how to change a person's thought processes should remain the sole province of the individual. The third is choice. The capabilities of the human mind should not be limited. As long as the individual is not directly harming others, governments should not criminally prohibit cognitive enhancement or the occasioning of any mental state through whatever means available. Historical traces of the concept can already be found in the works of Immanuel Kant and John Stuart Mill. Kant's concept of right
has to do, first, only with the external and indeed practical relation of one person to another, insofar as their actions, as deeds, can have, direct or indirect, influence on each other.
In his 1859 book On Liberty, Mill writes the following.
There is a sphere of action in which society, as distinguished from the individual, has, if any, only an indirect interest, comprehending all that portion of a person's life and conduct which affects only himself, or, if it also affects others, only with their consent. When I say only himself, I mean directly, and in the first instance, for whatever affects himself may affect others through himself. The appropriate region of human liberty comprises, first, the inward domain of consciousness, demanding liberty of conscience in the most comprehensive sense, liberty of thought and feeling, absolute freedom of opinion, and sentiment on all subjects. Secondly, the principles require liberty of tastes and pursuits, of framing the plan of our life to suit our own character, of doing as we like, subject to such consequences as may follow, without impediment from our fellow creatures, so long as what we do does not harm them, even though they should think our conduct foolish, perverse, or wrong.
In addition, Duke University School of Law professor Nita A. Farahani also points out that cognitive liberty protects against self-incrimination, a right explicitly granted by the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution and implicitly by Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights. The negative obligation imposed by cognitive liberty should not only limit governments, but also corporations and individuals. For example, a company called No Lie MRI used fMRI in a court case in 2009 to determine the truthfulness of a suspect's testimony. However, experts have serious doubts about its reliability. The second principle grants the freedom to alter or enhance one's own consciousness, either indirectly, for example by using meditation, yoga or prayer, or directly, by using existing technologies such as transcranial magnetic stimulation, or as of yet hypothetical technologies such as brain-computer interfaces. Without going into the racist and discriminatory practices, which we will cover in a future episode, this alone is enough to classify the war on drugs, which the United States took global, as a human rights disaster. The concept of cognitive liberty is also important to the transhumanism movement. According to Sententia,
cognitive liberty's strength is that it protects those who do want to alter their brains, but also those who do not.
Cognitive liberty is a more general implementation of and is fundamental to recognized rights such as freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, and freedom of religion. Our abilities to monitor and manipulate the mind will only grow. We have to protect ourselves against the more abhorrent uses of these technologies. So there you have it, that's cognitive liberty in a nutshell. What's your opinion? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next week.